Welcome to the 5th episode of Crazy Victorian Era and the 3rd part dedicated to Victorian sex. We've talked about the angelic woman, dangerous sex, female pleasure, and hysteria. Now we'll look at the debauched side that hid beneath the veil of respectability, or rather, the blanket of respectability that prevailed at the time, and the consequences of this debauchery. We'll also discover the beliefs about conception and the attempts to prevent masturbation. Let's begin. Prostitution and pedophilia. Only men were considered to have sexual desires and capable of experiencing pleasure from sex, and with the Industrial Revolution, things got significantly worse. The fashionable female ideal was morally rigid. The woman, queen of the home, fragile and weak, was simply supposed to submit to her husband and serve him out of moral obligation. During relations between husband and wife, the woman behaved as if she were frigid, chaste and pure, cold and angelic. It's no coincidence, then, that the 19th century is famous for prostitution, a widespread phenomenon, a social scourge. Men, wanting to satisfy their own instincts and seek pleasure and comfort outside the austerity and rigidity of their wives, found it convenient to turn more and more to prostitutes, who were condemned primarily because they engaged in prostitution of their own free will and found sexuality fulfilling and satisfying. Prostitution was a job that quickly brought money to women from the lower social classes. In fact, factory jobs offered to women and girls certainly did not provide security or decent pay. For poor women, it was synonymous with exploitation, hard labor, and the risk of sexual abuse. This was the historical period that saw the birth of pornography, thanks to the invention of photography. The most highly paid and sought-after prostitutes were virgins, and this led to a real trade in young girls, and even boys, whom the poorest families would hand over to brothels in exchange for sums that could reach up to £400 if the unfortunate children were under 12 years old. When the requests were unusual and the clients were wealthy and high-ranking, the pimps had no qualms about kidnapping girls from the middle or upper classes. In the Victorian era, when arranged marriages even took place between pre-teens, the legal age of sexual consent was 12, which was later raised to 13 in 1875. However, this extremely low age limit greatly encouraged child prostitution. And after the chilling exposé by William Stead, a reporter for the Pall Mall Journal, on the world of child prostitutes and the abuse they were forced to endure, a social movement was born that culminated in raising the age limit to 16 in 1885. Children were also in high demand because it was believed that they did not carry venereal diseases like gonorrhea and syphilis, which were widespread during the Victorian era, and also because some popular beliefs held that having sexual relations with a child could cure these illnesses. Venereal diseases and the sanitary repression of sexuality. These diseases became a real nightmare for late 19th century England because they spread from the clients of prostitutes to their wives and children, causing scandals in high society and a high mortality rate among the population. At first, Victorian doctors underestimated the massive spread of these diseases, dismissing them as a phenomenon of the slums. But when the symptoms and mortality became undeniable even among the middle class and the nobility, a special law was enacted in 1864, allowing suspected infected prostitutes to be stopped and forced to undergo medical examinations. If the disease was confirmed, they were confined for 3 months in a military hospital, where they were treated while being detained. However, no checks were carried out on the clients, who continued to spread the infection, driving it to monstrous peaks with the arrival of the 20th century. To contain the spread of the disease and limit the use of prostitution, prominent Victorian scientists and doctors began to prescribe that men restrict and only occasionally use their sexual energy, urging them to suppress their sexuality in favor of a more modest domestic life, and to avoid unhealthy and unwholesome urges. Abstinence and self-control were promoted as signs of moral elevation, material success, and a way to distinguish oneself from the lower social classes, who were seen as plagued and dominated by the anxieties and base instincts of sexuality. Even masturbation and nocturnal emissions were considered incompatible with artistic and cultural sensitivity, and special devices were developed to help men in their efforts to overcome sexual urges. These repressive practices, which attributed most mental and physical disorders in adolescence to excessive sexual excitement, even led to the widespread practice of cauterizing the penis and clitoris. The connection between orgasm and the sex of the newborn. This was firmly believed by Eugene Beclard, a French physiologist and author of a then-famous treatise on sexuality and fertility. The bestseller was titled Beclard's Physiology. Physiological mysteries and revelations about love, courtship, and marriage. An infallible guide for singles and married couples on matters of utmost importance to the human race. Within the pages of this concise little book, there's an intriguing theory about how the sex of a baby is determined. It depends on which partner experiences the stronger orgasm at the moment of conception. Sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's the woman, and this essential balance is reflected in birth statistics. Apparently, Beclard acknowledged the existence of the female orgasm. Bizarre contraceptive methods. To avoid unwanted pregnancies, the solution was much simpler than we might think. According to Beclard, all it took was for the woman to dance around the room for a few minutes right after intercourse before going to bed. In any case, if dancing wasn't enough, it was recommended to ride a horse at speed on a bumpy road the following day. To get pregnant, however, a wife who wanted or needed to conceive had to follow a very strict protocol. After intercourse, remaining completely still was essential. She couldn't talk, cough, or even sneeze. Any of these things could prevent conception. Sex between the spouses was not going well. There are many pages that recommend avoiding intercourse with your husband as much as possible. Ruth Smithers wrote instructions and advice for the young bride regarding conduct and discipline in the intimate and personal relationship of marriage, for the great spiritual sanctity of this blessed sacrament and the glory of God. According to Smithers, a woman should give herself rarely, infrequently, and above all, reluctantly. Otherwise, marriage turns into an orgy, and in that case, you should pretend to be ill, sleepy, or have a headache, the best friends of a woman. If not, it's good to argue, scold, and complain at least an hour before your husband usually wants to fulfill his marital duties. Fight masturbation with cornflakes. Maybe you didn't know this, but J.H. Kellogg invented his famous brand of cereal to fight what was considered one of the plagues of the time, young people's masturbation. The connection between the two things seems nonsensical to us today, but at the time it seemed obvious, at least to people like Kellogg, who thought that the hearty breakfasts given to young people, made of bacon and eggs, were too stimulating. Young people would become overexcited and, as a result, would feel the need to masturbate. For this reason, the diet had to be bland. With cereals, he would eliminate sexual appetites and calm young people, freeing them from evil. I'll see you in the next episode of Crazy Victorian Era. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and leave me a comment. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on my upcoming videos. Bye!